Welcome everyone to QA Tech Talks. Today our main invitee here is Michael Bolton. It's a pleasure to be hosting this. Pleasure to be hosting Michael Bolton is a big thing for me. Welcome, Michael. Just a little bit of an introduction for Michael. So he helps people and organizations find product problems and solve testing problems quickly and expertly with rapid software. Basically, you can also look into developsense.com from his LinkedIn profile, and also rapidsoftwaretesting.com. You can find some useful details there and see how you could potentially bring them into your teams if possible. So, Michael, today QA Tech Talks has brought a new kind of platform here today, something known as Test with Brains or Bots. So it's a new initiative program to share your view and basically get a discussion going on. So I will be here asking you some questions, and for the audience, feel free to write your questions as well. And yeah, we are here basically to kind of get your point of view about brains and bots, and what kind of suggestions you have for all of us here to take away and potentially lead with more quality in our teams. So without further ado, let's get started. So Michael, would you like to start with a little bit of introduction of how, what do you think about brains and bots initially, and then I'll ask you some more questions.
Well, I don't think it's very useful to talk about brains or bots in terms of an XOR function, exclusive OR, right? Where it's one thing or the other. Now, English is funny that way, and so are computer languages. Or, if you look at most computer languages, OR does not mean exclusive OR. It means one thing can be true, or the other thing can be true, and the logical output of that is true, right? So 1 0 or 1 1 and 1 0, or 1 0 and 1 1, or 2 1s evaluate to OR. To evaluate to a 1 rather, using the OR operator. But there's a weird operator that I would like to introduce, X AND, which is the idea that you have to have one of the two things. You don't need them both, but you need a specific one of the two things. And that is, if you don't have, so this is something that would be an OR that only works if the first one is true. The first one is true, it returns a true. Second one doesn't have to be true. In this case, you can test with brains and bots, and you can test with brains and no bots, but you can't test without brains. That's the thing. Now, in order to understand what that is, some of you will be familiar with this, and no doubt some will not. If I am famous for, if I'm remembered for anything, except that ugly incident at that party a few years ago, I would like it to be, I think, or at least one of the things I'm proudest of in the testing world is introducing a difference, a distinction between testing and checking, where checking is operating a product to check specific facts about it, operating a product algorithmically to check specific facts about it. We set the program up, we make it do things, we run it in specific and algorithmic ways in order to collect specific observations about it. Then we apply algorithmic rules, decision rules, to those observations. Algorithmic decision rules that return a 1 or a 0 or a yes or a no or a true or a false or a pass or a fail or a green or a red. And then we report the outputs of those decision rules, of those evaluations, algorithmically. By definition, a check is a process that, at least in theory, can be performed by a machine. We're operating a product algorithmically, mechanistically, to check specific facts about it, exactly the same way as we would operate a spelling checker. A spelling checker is something where we take some input and we tokenize it. We divide it into things that look like words, and then we compare those words to a list of words in a dictionary. And if the words in our document are on the list, they don't get a little red wavy line under them. But if they're not on the list in the dictionary, they get a little red wavy line. But here's the thing about that. Nobody calls it automated editing. Nobody calls that automated editing. It'd be crazy to call it automated editing, because everybody knows that editing is a process by which we evaluate in a social context the work. Try to make sense of it, we try to understand it, and then if we see things in the work that might cause confusion, or that look like mistakes, or that might not hit the mark of the author's intention, we provide suggestions to the author to change the work. But nobody calls that process automated. There's no automated journalism. There's no automated research. There's no automated parenting. There's no automated programming, and there's no automated management. We can evaluate a work, we can look through a document or a book or a magazine article, and we can evaluate that without tools, and we can evaluate it using lots of tools. Spelling checkers and grammar checkers, and we can validate whether certain files have been gathered together in a larger book, and we can use checks in order to identify the fonts, compare the fonts in the article to the list, but nobody would call that automated editing. They would think of it as using tools in editing. Now, why do we let this happen in testing? Why do we let it happen that people get to refer to what we're doing as automated testing just because we're using tools to run automated checks? A check can be performed by a machine, has the virtue of being very quick, very precise, or a check can be performed by a sufficiently disengaged human being. That is to say, a human being who's been instructed not to think and who is slow and variable. And that was what people used to refer to as scripted testing. Do this, and then do this, and then do this, and then do this, and then do this, and check for that. Now that does seem slow and variable, but remember that what people are referring to in that slow and variable evaluation of the thing, that only refers to the speed of specific observable behaviors, the typing, the moving of the mouse, the looking up of results. The machine is infinitely slow when it comes to recognizing trouble that it's not been programmed to recognize. Now, checking's okay. It's a useful thing to do, and we can use tools for all kinds of other purposes, but it's focused mostly on confirmation or demonstration. That things are what we anticipate and what we desire, what we expect in those senses. But there's a problem with verification. We can only verify something has happened. We can't verify that something will happen. We can verify that the product has appeared to work, but we can't verify that it does work or that it will work. And those are real problems in the logic of verification. It seems to me unfortunate that lots of people and even lots of testers have neglected the underlying logic between what a check can and cannot tell us. But a check is always embedded in testing. So the machines are very fast in one sense, but the machines are also very slow in another sense. So we call this checking and not testing. What is testing then? Testing is, well, it includes checking as part of the process, but testing is something much more expansive than that. Checking is evaluating a product by learning about it through experiencing, exploring, and experimenting. And that includes, to some degree, questioning, studying, modeling, observing the product, making inferences about it, making conjectures about it. It includes generating ideas and expanding on ideas that we've generated, refining ideas that we've expanded on, overproducing ideas, abandoning ideas that we've overproduced, recovering ideas that we've abandoned. And it includes navigating through the product and map making. It includes thinking critically about the product. It includes anticipating and testing for risk. And machinery can do none of these things. Machinery can aid us in these things, but machinery cannot do these things. That's a really, really important thing to keep in mind, it seems to me. Machinery can't do the testing. So there are people out there sometimes who say, well, let's automate all the testing. What you might mean, and what you could plausibly do, is automate all the checking that we want to do. That you could do. Automate all the testing, though, means automate all the evaluation, learning, and exploration, experimentation, modeling, and studying specs, and observation of the product, and inference drawing, and questioning, and risk assessment, and task prioritization, coverage analysis, and pattern recognition, and decision-making, and design of the test lab, and preparation of the test lab, and sense-making, and tech code development, tool selection, recruiting helpers, making notes, preparing simulations, interacting with developers, bug investigation, problem triage, relationship building, product configuration, application of oracles, designing visualization, spontaneous, playful interaction with the product, discovery of information, preparation of reports for management, recording of problems, investigation of problems, working out puzzling situations, building the test team, analyzing competitors, resolving conflicting information, benchmarking. How are you going to automate that? How are you going to automate that? You're not going to automate that because these are human social things. So let's not talk about automating the testing. Let's instead talk about using tools in powerful ways. While we're at it, let's not talk about manual testing or automated testing, because testing can't be automated. But then wait a second, if testing can't be automated, what does manual testing mean? What does it mean to test something manually? None of this stuff on the screen here, none of this stuff that you see here can be, it's crazy to think of thinking as a manual thing, isn't it? We'll return to that point. Testing, though, is also embedded in another kind of testing, another part of testing, the testing work that is necessary to create the conditions so that our clients can help make informed decisions about risk. Creating the conditions necessary for evaluating a product by learning about it through exploring and experimenting and experiencing it. And testing also includes another thing, which wraps around the other stuff there. Testing requires, absolutely requires, developing skill and determination and a desire and a reputation for creating the conditions necessary for evaluating a product by learning about it through experiencing, exploring, and experimenting, which includes sometimes operating the product algorithmically to check specific facts about it. So I'm getting older and grumpier about this sort of stuff, and I'm getting less and less patient with people who are not really thinking and focusing very clearly on what it means to test something. You can use a bot to help you, but the bot won't do any good without the brains. So sort of like an inclusive or. I don't exactly know what operator there may be such an operator. I guess it's an or that automatically gets set on the first input to it. All right, so in my gripe about testing being manual and automated, one of the things that I really get angry and upset about is something that, well, it happened a few months ago. Whoops, let's jump to that there. What does manual mean? Well, a dictionary isn't very helpful when it talks about manual in terms of relating that to something that people might mean by manual testing. Means done with the hands. It comes from the Latin manus, hand. In French, the word main, M-A-I-N, refers to hands. That's what manual refers to, doesn't it? Oh, or it might mean operated or controlled by hand, like a typewriter that is, as an adjective, a manual typewriter. Or it might mean something that is a handbook that we open up, a manual, a user manual for a product. Or it could be an organ keyboard played with the hands, not the feet. I don't know if you've ever seen a church organ, a fancy church organ. Nobody says manual eating. Nobody says manual programming. We don't expect tools to do those things. Why do we talk about manual testing? In the Oxford Dictionary, it's talking about idiom when it says operated or controlled by hand. Like, for example, a manual transmission on a car. We're not operating the whole thing by hand. We're operating a lever that connects to other machinery, rather than automatically or electronically. Well, we know that there's such a thing as computers. So what about that? What if we take automatically and consider what that is? What does automatically mean? Well, there's some interesting things in the dictionary about that. Automatically might refer to little or no direct human control, like a printer that receives some signals and a piece of paper comes out. Very little human control involved with that, a piece of paper with interesting markings on it. Or automatically might mean without conscious thought or attention. Like, for example, somebody asked me today, how are you feeling? And I automatically said, I'm fine. That's a sense of automatically. Or it might mean as a natural, necessary, inevitable result, outcome of some particular rule or some particular set of circumstances, if you test positive for certain drugs at the Olympics, you're automatically disqualified. So that's idiomatic English, really, if automatic refers to a machine, something that is done by itself without human attention. So let's see if we sort those things out. If that is what manual is not, then maybe we can flip the logic and think about what manual is. Manual is maybe with conscious thought or attention, or with direct human control, or with human creativity or human engagement or human initiative. Therefore, when you want to say manual testing, I think it's toxic to talk about manual testing. I think it demeans the craft and diminishes the craft to talk about manual testing. And there's another little story that I'll throw in a sec. But if you want to talk about manual testing, it seems to be useful to me to have an alternative that refers to what's going on in a more specific kind of way. So we could talk about attended testing, where I need to be there. I need to watch or monitor or interact with the product immediately, that is not mediated. Or it could be experiential. My interaction with the product is naturalistic. I'm engaged and interacting with the product in a way that is virtually indistinguishable from some contemplated user. Or we could mean exploratory, wherein the process isn't automatic in the sense that once one thing is done, we automatically go to the next thing. We make choices as we go, and those choices are a reflection of and conditioned by our agency. That is, we are responsible for the choices that we make as we go, versus scripted testing, wherein choices are made in advance, made for me. Somebody else is guiding or steering my testing. So you could say, instead of saying manual testing, you could say, I performed attended testing. I was doing attended testing. What I was doing was I was witnessing or performing actions that were part of the testing, that were characterizing the testing. Or you could say experiential testing, in which, except for the bit where I write down notes after some of my actions, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between me and somebody who is actually using the software. Notice, by the way, that experiential testing might involve considerable tooling and considerable mediation between me and the product. Because, for example, if I'm a programmer using an API, I got to be using tools. I've got to be using machinery. That's how we get at what the machinery can do for us as programmers. But the key is that I would not have something in between me and the programming job if I were testing experientially an API. On the other hand, I could instrument my testing of the API by using a tool like Postman, which is not the way programmers use APIs. Programmers use APIs in code. They don't use the tooling afforded by Postman in order to test the product. Postman is an instrument that distorts the natural, realistic, regular experience of the programmer. But not in a damaging way necessarily. But there is a way it can be kind of damaging, and that is when we take very programmers who struggle with dealing with APIs, testers who struggle with that level of programming, and we give them a copy of Postman. And then by the same token, we take testers who are really, really expert programmers, and we point them and their tools at the GUI. And to me, that's exactly backwards. It's exactly backwards to do that. People who are struggling with code, by all means, help them learn to code. Give them the tools that they need, help them learn to build their own tools. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But while they're struggling to code, don't make them try to test an API by using a mediated tool like that. Get their hands and eyes, get their hands on the keyboard and their eyes on the product, and let them interact with the product experientially as they learn to code. And then for the really expert coders, let them test the API as a developer would. Now, I'm not dismissing Postman. I'm not dismissing, by any means, I'm not dismissing testers who don't code. It's a nice thing for testers to code, but it's not the only thing. And if testers are struggling with coding, let them experience the product using the GUI. And let's try to dial back, way, way back, the interaction between code and the GUI, because the GUI was not designed for code. It was designed for a human user interface. And so if we're evaluating the GUI, let's try to do that vast majority of our work by actually interacting with it and experiencing it, testing it in an experiential way. Now, we can still use tools for some dimensions of this, but can we drop our fixation on that? If we want to use tools to evaluate a GUI, there's all kinds of tools we can use to do that that don't involve trying to replicate the user experience, because the machine doesn't experience the product in the same way that a user does. Finally, we can talk about, as an alternative to manual testing, we can talk about exploratory testing. My testing was mostly exploratory. That is, I didn't go into the process with a plan, a canned set of ideas, and nobody was telling me what to do. Now, these are not synonyms, none of them, but they do overlap to some degree. They combine into at least 5 configurations. And I think that James and I have been talking about this, and I think there's actually one more, but let's have a look. Experiential testing that is attended, but not exploratory. That's where you are interacting with the product in a relatively natural way, but you're following a script as you do it. The script is intended to reflect how a user might interact with the product. So it is experiential and it is attended, but it's not very exploratory because the script is controlling the tester's choices. Or you could talk about attended testing that is neither experiential nor exploratory, where you write a script and you attend it, you watch it, and you intervene if there's a problem with it. But the machinery's choices are already predetermined, and the machinery is not interacting with the product in a way that some person would experience it. You could have testing that is experiential and attended and exploratory. That's the naturalistic kind of testing that we do when we're engaged in interacting with the product in a way that reflects normal usage. We're experimenting with it. We are getting experience with it. We're learning about it. We're exploring it, and we're engaged in the process. Or we could have testing that is attended and exploratory, but not very experiential. That is, using an API or a tool like Postman. This is not the experience of the programmer, but it is attended, and the tester is encouraged and able to make choices during the testing process. Finally, there's exploratory testing that is neither experiential nor attended. And that's where sometimes we call this a human transceiver. I give instructions to a tester, and I say, do this and do this and do this and do this. The tester comes back to me and tells me about the results. And then I respond to those results and give the tester further instructions. So I'm not attending the testing, I'm not experiencing the testing, but I'm guiding the testing in an exploratory way, because the choices are not being made by someone else, they're being made by me. Then there's automated checking, which is none of attended, nor experiential, nor exploratory if the tester's not there watching it. That's not by itself testing, because it's not evaluating a product by learning about it through experiencing and exploring and experimenting. I got one more thing to say about this, and then I'll open it up for questions. 2 more things to say. There's never just one. Let's look at this. And this is a subset, and this is a very imperfect kind of illustration, but I hope it conveys what I'm trying to convey here. These are some of the things that we would see if we looked at the planet of testing, if we looked at the world of testing. And on that planet, we will see things that are non-mechanizable, and we will see things that are mechanizable. So in this mode of, or this model of testing here, there are certain things that you can see that machinery can help with really, really powerfully. searching and sorting and filtering data and probing the product and setting it up and visualizing output, taking output and converting it from one form to another, transformations and stuff like that, the machinery is able to do, essentially creating new strings out of other strings. But then there's all this other stuff, reporting on our status and designing experiments and analyzing risk and creating tools and getting experience with the product and thinking critically about it and analyzing risk. All those things that cannot be automated. But here's a problem we get. People in the old days used to equate scripted testing with testing. And now what they do is they equate automated checking with testing. And they put all their focus on this stuff because tools are dazzling, tools are fascinating, tools are engaging in the sense of creating this visual stimulus. And people sort of, entrancing is a better word than engaging, I suppose. And then people say, well, you know, when you look what humans do when they're testing, they're slow and they're variable and they're imprecise and they make mistakes, they're inconsistent. What would happen if you took the machinery out of automated checking? Well, then you'd get automated checking without a machine. And you'd end up with human checking, where the humans performing the checking would be boring because they would be automated. That is, someone would be in there under controlling them. That they wouldn't be engaged with it, and they'd be slow and boring and so on and so forth. So when people are talking about manual testing, very often they're talking about this instead of talking about, they're comparing things this way instead of comparing things this way. This is all the stuff in testing, and it's a subset of the list, that is not automated checking. But people dismiss this, and then they refer to manual testing as this. All right, that's the second last thing. Here's the last thing. The last thing I have to say about this is that in the course of working through this for a presentation that I did several years ago, or not several years ago, not quite a year ago, in the course of doing this, I got into a conversation with a fellow who said he wanted to hire a manual tester. And as I usually do, I said, what do you mean by a manual tester? And they say somebody, well, it's somebody who's not doing programming as part of their testing, but somebody who is interacting with the product manager, the product owner on that basis. And of course, you know, I'm making this distinction because, well, you know, to be frank, I'm going to pay them less. The people with the automated testing stuff, he said, that people who are able to automate their tests, he said, well, those people, you know, they get higher pay. So what's happening here? What's happening is that the things that are really important, or so it seems to me, human engagement and human interaction, talking with the programmer, talking with the product owner, thinking critically about risk and problems. And by the way, because of a real serious problem we've got in our business of tech bros, programmers, who are through cultural forces tend to drive women out. That whole talking to people stuff is worked very often much more closely associated with women than with men. So this is a way of saying we're going to pay, that's women's work, and we're going to pay the women less. Well, you know, as I say, I'm a grumpy old man, so I'm going to say it this way. Fuck that. It's disgraceful. It is absolutely disgraceful. And I think manual testing, using the term manual testing, helps to reinforce that in its own contributor. Okay, I'm done with my grumpy rant, and now I'm open to your questions.
Thank you so much, Michael. I think the last comment that you made really made me smile. I think I agree with that as well. I was getting asked questions the other day to publish at a magazine, and this was one of the questions as well, actually. So I did draft something similar around women getting paid less and why women are not attracted to the tech world as well. So we need to work a bit harder in this area to attract more women.
Well, more human beings altogether, you know, our technology development should reflect human society, shouldn't it? Skillful people, but linking the worlds of humans and the world of machines can't. I'll just get upset if I keep talking about it. We can't leave out people based on what they look like, and we can't leave out people based on gender and gender preferences and so on. That sort of stuff is just monstrous.
Yeah, agree. So yeah, I've got a question from Vivek Kumar. He's asking, is there a future? Is there future in manual testing?
I hope not. I hope the word dies. There's a future in testing, but come on, Vivek. There is no manual testing and there's no automated testing. There's testing that uses tools. All testing uses tools to some degree. So is there a future in, are you saying, is there a future in attended testing? Absolutely. If the tester isn't attending the testing, then it's not really testing, is it? If the tester is not attending some part of the process, testing has to be attended at some point. We have to, first of all, we have to develop our ideas about how we're going to apply tools and how we're going to evaluate risk. Is that a manual process? Well, if so, I think it's a silly way to talk about it. But if we talk about it that way, okay, there's a future in that because that's what testing's all about. Is there a future in interpreting the output from machinery? Oh, gee, I don't know. Why don't we just let the machines make all the decisions about whether the product is good enough? Well, talking about it in that way would be ludicrous, it seems to me. So here's my suggestion for you, Vivek. Ask yourself, is there a future in testing? Testing has been around as long as humans have been trying to make stuff and saying, does this do the thing it's supposed to do? Or are there problems with it? Testing, if you look at little kids, little tiny kids, we are born testers. Kids pick stuff up and they shake it and they examine it and they think, what can I do with this? That's testing. Is there a future in testing? As long as there are human beings walking the earth, there's a future in testing. So drop the manual part. Drop the manual part and remember that testing might include tools, might exploit tools, but we're not talking about, is there a future in manual testing? We're talking about, is there a future in testing? And of course there is. So there you go.
Yeah, 100% agree. We are testing all the time, actually, just even cooking, trying different recipes, exploring.
And reading a book and thinking critically about it by applying thought experiments to it. That's a form of testing in a way. It's testing ideas.
Yes, 100%.
Yes, just a second, Lavina. Yes, Michael, I agree with you. The thing is but there should be some differentiation, right? So for example, let's see like manual car, selfless, which is the semi-automatic car or Tesla auto drive. So there should be some kind of differentiation. So for example, when we're doing the testing, we also say, okay, what you're doing for developers, unit testing. So what you're doing, integration testing. So there should be some kind of naming convention, right?
There's no problem with using adjectives to describe your testing. There's no problem with doing that. It's just that manual and automated are bankrupt ways of doing it. Right? Here's another heuristic you can apply. When you're talking about unit testing or integrated testing or performance testing or user interaction testing, what you're talking about, I think, is when you're applying an adjective like that, most of the time, it seems to me what we're doing is we're saying X testing is testing focused on risk related to X. So unit testing is testing that's focused on risks related to the units. Integration testing is testing focused on risks that we might discover in the integration. Performance testing is testing focused on performance-related risk. UI testing is testing focused on risk related to the UI. Those kinds of differentiations are fine. Automated testing wouldn't make sense under that. It would be testing related to automation risk. Manual testing related to manual risk. So try that as a heuristic, try that as an approach to see if it makes sense. Now there's some, I remember thinking of a couple of exceptions to that pattern. But in general, mostly it seems to me that X testing, when we put an adjective in front of testing, we're talking about where the risk focus is. I know there must be exceptions to that. So I welcome those, but take manual and automated and throw them out. Unit, integration, no worries, it's fine.
Okay, Michael, thank you. Yes, Lavina, please carry on.
Yeah, we've got another question. So during exploratory tests, sometimes we find a bug but face difficulty in replicating it back again for the devs. So Chitrart is asking, please put some light on this kind of situation, what to do here.
At least 3 things I can think of. Number 1, take good notes. As a tester, when I look around the world, and I've traveled, I like making this boast, and then I think to myself sometimes, in the field of climate change and all that, is this something I should really be proud of? But I've flown 1 million miles, more than 1 million miles, to help people learn how to test. And as I've gone there, one thing that happens everywhere I land is I find that testers aren't really that great at taking notes, by and large, most of them. So that's one skill to be practiced. Keep a record of what you're doing. And the good thing about that is it tends to slow you down in very productive ways. People say, oh, I have to take notes all the time. That's not efficient. Well, testing shouldn't be too efficient. There are certain inefficiencies that we should inject in testing to introduce pauses so that we can reflect and observe. For certain kinds of testing work, of course. Second thing, log files. If developers are complaining that they don't know what happened when you were using the product, one thing you can respond to them is to say, it would really, really help if we had log files, because those provide a retrospective look at what was tested to some degree. Third, video record your testing. It's absolutely amazing to me how helpful that can be sometimes. So one of the things that we could do is simply do a video. Just have the video recorder running. So it's kind of like the black box on an airplane, you know, which, by the way, they're orange, but the black box on the airplane, the records from that usually get tossed fairly quickly. So it's not like you have to overload zillions and zillions of hard drives with a bunch of stuff that nobody's ever going to look at again. But if you get stuck, you can rewind the video and have a look if you don't know how something happened. There's a 4th hint, which I could give you, which is James, very early in his blogging career, wrote a blog post which will reveal itself pretty quickly when I look it up and I put it on the screen. It will be satisfice.com and then intermittent, I think it's intermittent bugs. And when it comes up, where do we get? Oh, there we get it. First hit. Right there, how do we investigate intermittent problems is the title of the blog post. And it's got lots of really good ideas on how to replicate tricky bugs. I can put a link to that in the chat if you like. There we go. Next question.
Yeah, I really like this question. I think it's from Vishali. Nowadays, the trend in changing to get people who know DevOps or QA ops. So do testers need to adapt their terminology to ops?
Why? Why? No is the answer. I don't think so. You know, if I don't know why these fads go through our world. You know, there's a Peanuts cartoon, you know, Charlie Brown, where somebody comes along, and this is the 1960s, I think, or 50s, where she says, "Look at my new hi-fi bracelet." What's hi-fi? It's just a buzzword. Now, if we're thinking in terms of how James, I think, put it really nicely when he said that what we're talking about here is delivery ops, delivery operations. The original idea about DevOps is that, get this is really amazing to me. The idea was developers and operations people working together in order to help achieve the needs and the goals of the business. Wow, what a great idea. And I want to know, how screwed up did our business have to be before that started looking like something new and novel? Was that not supposed to be the way things were all the way along? Isn't that how things are supposed to be? So that said, there is something worth thinking about, and that is, if we are doing testing as part of the build process, it makes a lot of sense to me, but let us not replace experiential testing. Let's not replace deep testing with the shallow kind of testing that is being done through the process of automated build checking. It's okay to do automated build checking. It's okay to evaluate the build, but let's make sure that we don't forget there's a big difference between testing the product and checking the build. Now, sometimes what we do in a DevOpsy kind of context is that we're doing testing that is focused on preparing the product, checking the product to make sure that there are no obvious problems, easily detectable problems, checkable problems that sneak into the build somehow. Let's think in terms of this. There's business risk and technical risk. One risk is that we might not be clear on what the customers would want the product to do and how to build it. So we should probably talk about that and see if we can sort that out and straighten it out. That's a place for testers to participate. We might be, as a development group, committing easy to find avoidable errors as we try to build the product. That's something where testers can help too, although I'd argue the kind of testing that is happening in here as we're building the product and trying to keep the cost of development low, that's mostly, it seems to me, the developer's domain, in which the developers are doing what we might call shallow testing. That sounds like a diss. It's not a diss. Shallow testing, the shallowness of shallow testing is a feature, not a bug, because it allows testers, or it allows developers rather, to avoid committing easy to find errors. And by committing, it's a pun. There's two meanings there. Committing, making mistakes, committing errors, or committing them into the repository, into the code repository, right? Git commit. It might be hard to know what to build. It might be hard to avoid errors, or it might be hard to identify deep problems in the product. And even after we've done all these things really well, there may be serious problems that escape even a highly disciplined development process. Those are 4 frames for testing that we refer to as the intention frame, in which we're doing testing and review to help us discover what the customer really wants. discipline framed testing. And this is the developer's domain mostly, but testers can participate in it if they're invited, if they're welcome. And that involves review, pairing, shallow, fast, easy testing, lower level output checking, a unit checking, automated checking that can help us to confirm that what we've just done as a development group is reasonably close to our intentions. And then where testers might want to get involved with this is in the preparation that DevOps affords that makes the product more practically testable. If we can build the product really quickly and really efficiently, then after a change or after a new feature has been added, we can interact with the product without the process of building it being really inefficient and without there being unchecked bugs. That can help us to test efficiently. So the question is, how do, should testers put themselves into that space? Maybe, but let's just remember when we're doing this, it takes time away from doing this. Testing in the realization frame, where we're getting deep experience, deep investigation of the product. We're testing deeply. Deep testing is testing that maximizes the chance of finding every elusive bug. Now, it won't find every elusive bug. Testing can't do that, but it maximizes the chance of doing so. So there is great temptation because whenever we're surrounded by programmers, we're always picking up on the programmer's culture. There's great temptation to put testing work down here and to think that that's all there is to it. It's not bad to put testing in here, not by any means. It's not bad to put testing in here, spreading, not shifting, spreading left. Because if we're shifting left, it seems to me that we're going to forget this stuff. We're going to displace this stuff. Now, it's productive to do this stuff. It's productive to do this stuff. It's productive to do this stuff too. But let's not use our involvement with these things displace this stuff. Let's use our involvement with these things, accelerate and intensify our capacity to do deep testing when and where it's needed.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Michael. It's been a very insightful session and it's been great hosting you today. Thank you as well, QA Tech Talks. Thanks for the questions. Sorry we couldn't answer all your questions, but hopefully, yeah.
Here's what to do. Send those questions to me, okay? And I will cheerfully answer them, provide answers to them, or provide links to where I've answered something like those questions already. I will happily do that. So gather those questions from the chat. And Lavina, if you can find a way of getting those answers back to everybody who has been on this meeting, we could do that. Or I suppose I could publish them in my blog or something like that. But I want to honor everybody's questions and I want to respond to them. So we can do that.
Yeah, I think Zoom's a bit funny. The minute we end this meeting, all the questions will go unless Vinayak, you've got another way of getting these questions, then that would be great.
Sure,
I think they show up in the chat, don't they? They are in the Zoom archive. When you exit the Zoom meeting, everything that's happened in the chat window gets put into a file on your machine. Certainly for the host.
Right.
Certainly for the host. I also think for everybody else too.
Okay, so I guess Vinayak's got it because he's the host.
Okay,
Perfect.
well, the other thing I can do is I can just go in there and I've got, yeah, Control-C and it's done.
And Control-V, yeah, perfect.
No, Michael, I will share with you and we will share from QA Tech Talks as a blog. So,
oh, that's great. That would be a great way to do it. Sure, yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Just before I go off, just to let everyone know who's joined today, there's a certification and Amazon voucher rewards for the test with brains or bots. There's basically a self-hosting bit that you can do on YouTube. You can add a quick overview about the topic, theme, and QA Tech Talks community. Please read the questions which are below, and I'm going to send you the link to that. Record your session in MP4 format and share with team.qa.techtalks@gmail.com. The video length can be from 15 minutes to maximum of 25 minutes. And feel free to add any other points you prefer based on your experience. So I'm going to send this link out to all of you right now, and hope and wish you all good luck with it.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a real pleasure. And I thank Vinayak and Levina for your hosting the meeting and inviting me. And thank you to all who spent an hour with me.
Our pleasure. It was our pleasure to have you.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Have a nice day, all of you.
Thanks, everyone.